Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Learnings from Millions of Conversations with Students. We're looking forward to an insightful session. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce our hosts and mention some quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, we have Dave Marshall. Dave isn't just Mongoose's CEO, he's the one who saw a gap in higher ed communication and decided to change the game. Before founding Mongoose, he co-created Liquid Matrix, a platform that helped over 400 institutions better engage students, ultimately leading to its acquisition by Datatel. His expertise goes beyond education, having consulted on digital engagement for the NFL Network, NHL Network, and major sports franchises. For Dave, this isn't just business, it's personal. Having overcome a severe stutter in his late 30s, he knows firsthand the power of clear, accessible, and meaningful conversations. That same philosophy drives Mongoose's mission to create technology that removes barriers and builds trust. Next up is Josie Sutcliffe. With more than 25 years in marketing and SaaS growth, she has helped build and scale brands that make an impact. She played a key role in growing Vizier's marketing engine, leading to $125 million in subscription sales. As CMO at FinTech OS, she fueled 500% North American and 200% European pipeline growth in 6 months. And at tech provider Bibliu, she led a 224% ARR growth surge. Josie blends data-driven precision with creative firepower, making sure Mongoose's marketing isn't just seen, but also felt. When she's not growing brands, she's sipping great coffee, getting lost in a book, or possibly doing both at once. If you have any questions, please send them directly through the Q&A, and Josie and Dave will answer them at the end of the session. If you have any comments, feel free to use the general chat. We will be sharing the slides and the recording out tomorrow. Lastly, please feel free to engage with us on social media with the hashtag Mongoose. Thank you, and let's begin.
Hey, thanks, Ria. We're really happy to be here. We thought we would kick it off with a poll just to understand who is on the call with us today. So the poll will be popping up to you shortly. There it is. If you can just answer, check all the boxes that apply to you. So the type of institution you work for, the area you work in, and so on. That would be wonderful. So, and yeah, I see a few people dropping in their specific location in the chat. Please feel free to do that as well. It's always great to see where everyone is coming from. All right, so we'll give it maybe a couple more seconds and then see the results here. Last chance to vote. All right, I'm just waiting to see the answer. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see this. So 68% four-year institution, a quarter of you are at a community or tech college, two-year institution, 10% in admissions or enrollment, about a quarter in advisement or student success, a very small percent, 3% in advancement or alumni relations, about 10%, 9 or 10% part of the board, cabinet, or executive team, and 23% you're doing other things that we didn't list here. So feel free to drop those other areas in the chat as well. Great. Well, we're definitely going to cover off a lot about four-year institutions. We're going to refer to some two-year institution data, but the good news is there's a version of our report that was done just for two-year. And we're going to, in terms of actual topic areas, focus in on enrollment as well as student success. All right, but first, I just wanted to give like a 30-second introduction to Mongoose in case you are new to us. So Mongoose was founded about 10 years ago by Dave Marshall and his team at the time to really help to move people forward. And when we started as a company, we were doing text, and that evolved to include chat over time and WhatsApp, and really to become a student engagement platform. But more recently, we've evolved into conversation intelligence, which we're going to be talking more about today and explaining what that is. What we are really amazing at is enabling empathy at scale across all the different types of conversations you're having digitally with your constituents, whether they're prospects, students, parents, alum, and so on. And in fact, today, Mongoose powers and sends more messages and conversations for higher ed than any other technology provider. And you can see some of our stats here. So in our agenda today, we're going to give you a little bit of an intro to conversation intelligence. So what it is and why you should care about it. We're then going to give you a little more info on where the data comes from for the report findings that we're going to be sharing. And then we're going to dig into the heart of it and really share some of those key findings that we had when we analyzed this data. And all of this data is going to be data from the last year or so. So really up to the minute, fresh and relevant for you. And hopefully you can take a number of those findings back and start applying them into your daily lives right away. And then we'll make sure to save some time at the end for Q&A. So let's start with what is conversation intelligence. So it's always great to go to a dictionary. So in this case, Merriam-Webster, and see what the dictionary thinks these words mean. So if you look at what a conversation is, it's really an exchange between two or more people, whether it's thoughts, feelings, ideas. It's about having this dynamic, interactive back and forth where you're sharing information, asking questions, and responding to each other. Intelligence is our ability to learn, to apply knowledge, to understand new concepts, to adapt to new situations, and to solve problems. And it includes, understanding, learning from experience, and doing this problem solving. And up until recent years, intelligence was all human led. It's now, of course, increasingly aided by AI. And so when you bring these two things together, they really do get at the heart of what we mean by conversation intelligence. It's about having conversations. So in this case, digital conversations through text, chat, WhatsApp, that are intended to be interactive and dynamic, and exchange these kind of thoughts, ideas, questions, and so on, aided by intelligence, whether that's the intelligence of the people doing the messaging or the best practices built in, the playbooks built in, and the AI and analytic-based insights that are built into the platform. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Dave to tell you a bit more.
Thanks. So this slide is intended to give everybody context, like, wait, where are these conversations happening? Where did we get the data? So our platform, if you look on the left-hand side, has the ability for staff at an institution to manage conversations via text, via chat, live chat, WhatsApp. Those are the channels that are there. And then on the right side, the intelligence. For years, we've been able to get basic metrics like what is the reply rate, what is the average time for a response to come from a staff member. But with AI, we are now able to get insights like, was this conversation resolved? And what was the emotion that we're seeing in the conversation? And what was the key topic? So we have used AI to open the world of, wow, we can really get a better window into what conversations are happening on campus. And then the integrations, you can go to the next slide. So our platform happens to be integrated with the CRM, the ERP system, the SIS, the fundraising platform, the success platform, all of the different technologies that exist on a campus. And this allows for one fluid experience for the student, which is always the audience that we're trying to serve most. So we're going to launch another poll here. And how do you communicate with students today? And please select all that apply. And a couple more seconds for people to answer the poll. And then we could go to the results, please. Email. Yes, that is one dominant way that institutions definitely rely on when communicating. And phone, in person, excellent. Messaging, so text and WhatsApp and web chat and direct messaging. Okay, so a lot of different mediums being used there. Thank you. So there was some independent research done on Gen Z, and this is a chart that shows average weekly screen time for these apps. So the average Gen Zer in December of 23 anyway is on TikTok for 9 hours per week. And then you can see the Instagram, then just texting. And then there's, as you go down, there's Snapchat. So all of these that I mentioned are messaging platforms, and email is not on this list. If you go to the next slide, please. So some more info on Gen Z. They, like other generations, I think as well, prefer digital communications. And the medium, when you're messaging, we have seen students be so much more willing to be vulnerable and to ask for help than they might not do it at all if it's in person, or heavens, they're not going to call you and open up, right? So it's just a really powerful medium, but with that, it should be respected too, because it's a personal space. So what we're seeing in the market is that traditional outreach no longer works nearly as well. Often students don't want to log into a portal. Often they don't want to check email. They use their email only to, verify their email address when they join a website that they want to shop or something like that. And we are at the point where enrollment is not going up at every school. So it's a challenge that we want to enroll and retain as many students as we can. And there's almost been this black box. How is the campus community feeling? And there's been limited options as to how you could find that out. I mean, you could survey them, you could be a good listener, but that's the current environment. So with a conversation intelligence platform, its purpose is to ensure that your staff are having empathetic, productive conversations with students, and it would provide actionable insights into what conversations are happening and how the students are feeling, and it would manage compliance for you too, so you don't start to get blocked by the carriers. All of those things enable more productive, more empathetic conversations with students, which has a return on investment and a return on education associated to it. So for those that kind of want to know, this is a screenshot of the dashboard within our product, so our clients are able to see. This one across 427 conversations, the team's contacts are feeling positive. The emotions that we're seeing are joy, neutral, interest, satisfaction, concern. What the most prevalent topics are, so housing in general and withdrawal and scholarship, and then what portion of the conversations are completed, so that they can have an insight into are we seeing this through.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And I'm watching. It's great to see that the chat is active, and I do encourage you to share your thoughts as we go through there. And I think that email there's a mandate for email across institutions for a good reason. It is sort of seen as that official way of communicating information that has to last forever, stand the test of time. We're going to talk more about when messaging makes sense and when text and chat makes sense. So in terms of where the data comes from, as I mentioned, Mongoose's platform is being used by more higher ed institutions in the US to send more messages than any other platform. So for this particular report, we focused on the 23 to 24 academic year. And we looked at data, the text data set, looked at 80 million text messages that were being sent by and interacted with by 600 institutions, over 4,000 teams at those institutions, and 19,000 users. And then we are going to share some insights into chat as well as we get towards the end of our webinar today. And the chat data set, in this case, we focused in on about 130,000 chat conversations, so back and forths. All right, so now we'll get into the heart of things. So the key questions we were asking when we started to work on this report is we wanted to really understand when do target audiences, so those could be students, it could be alumni and prospects and so on, when are they most likely to engage with messages they're receiving? What are the formats of messages that work the best in terms of engagement and replies and results and so on? How do different types of messages influence the student or recipient engagement? So, for example, including images or a URL and so on. What are the conversation topics that generate the most engagement? Where are institutions performing the best in terms of resolving those topics? And where is there an area for improvement? And then we also looked at how AI-driven messaging and chat solutions are impacting the types of interactions that you're all having with your students and alums. So we're going to share these links again, or these QR codes again at the end of the webinar, and certainly I'm sure in our follow-up emails to you. But if you want to scan meanwhile, these are the codes. You can grab your own copy of both these reports. We're going to be focusing in on the four-year institution data for admissions and student success. There's also an advancement donor alumni relations section in the four-year institutions report, and then the two-year institutions looks at data just for those types of college. So, all right, let's start with admissions. So one of the first things we looked at was, what is the best time to actually engage with students? When do they reply the most? So here's a few of those data sets or data results. So students are most likely to reply to messages. This is in terms, so really these are prospective students because this is in that kind of admissions enrollment area. They're most likely to respond between 1 to 2 p.m. or 8 to 9 p.m. at night. So when you think about what their typical breaks might be in their day, that's when they're looking at their texts and most likely to respond to them. The worst time of days is first thing in the morning, and really over that kind of dinner hour, 5 to 6 p.m. In terms of fastest replies, so this is the speed at which students will respond to a message you've just sent out. That really aligns with the best time of day for replies as well. So students are the quickest to reply when it's early to mid-afternoon or kind of after dinner time. So, the short of this is if you're sending out a message and you really want to get the students that you're messaging to respond right away, you're best to be sending it out in that kind of early to mid-afternoon timeframe or after dinner time. And the day of week does matter here. So for enrollment admissions, the best days of the week for engagement are Mondays and Thursdays. Saturday is the worst day. So students are 8 times more likely to be engaging with you on a Monday than on a Saturday. So in terms of different types of functions and institution types, here's the results like across the different areas. So we're going to be, I just talked about admissions. We're going to be digging in a little further to student success in a few minutes. But you can see that the days of the week actually vary. So for admissions, it was Monday and Thursdays being the best days. For student success, where you're dealing with current students, it's actually Sundays and Wednesdays that are the best. And strangely, Mondays and Saturdays are the worst. So really the flip of what we're seeing on the admission side. And then in terms of communicating, usually this is with alumni for advancement. All weekdays seem to perform equally well, but weekends do see lower rates when people are busy with family and enjoying their free time. And then finally, two-year institutions across all areas, you see steady engagement all week long, but Saturdays significantly lower engagement than other days of the week. And yes, we will definitely share the slides. Just noticing the chat there. So now let's look at peak engagement times across all those different areas. So I mentioned admissions, it's kind of 1 to 2 p.m., 8 to 9 p.m. For student success, the peak time is actually first thing in the morning, which is again sort of the opposite of what it was for admissions. So it's 7 a.m. and then mid-afternoon are the peak engagement times. So the times when students are most likely to respond to the messages that you're sending out. For advancement, when you're reaching out to alumni, it's going to be late at night, kind of 8 to 10 p.m. or mid-morning that you're going to see stronger engagement. And then for two-year institutions, late morning, early afternoon are your best times to focus on in terms of getting engagement. All right. So now in terms of message length, the real message here is to keep it short, to be concise and pithy with your messages. Messages that are that 50 to 100 character rate form the best, and they actually get 2.5 times higher reply rates than longer messages. And really, the longer your message gets, the lower the reply rate gets at this point. So when your message starts exceeding 250 characters, it's going to actually have the lowest reply rate. So a really good reminder to be very efficient and tight in your messaging. All right, now I'm going to just explain briefly what a smart message is, because then I'm going to share some results about why you should really try to make all of your messages smart when it makes sense. So on this slide, you see on the left-hand side what we're calling a batch message. So in this message, the person just, the institution messages out, our open house kicks off at 8 a.m., hope to see you there. The person replies, thanks, hope to make it. Wait, is there another one? And that's really it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. This is a pretty common scenario, and I should say is very much based on what we've seen happen even on our platform, where it's a one-directional message, sort of like a broadcast notification that doesn't really encourage that kind of engagement or conversation back. On the right-hand side, you see a smart message. So a smart message is one where you're able to give options as answers. So A, B, C. So, hey, what excites you most? So you're asking a question. Is it, the club fair, AI fair, the AirPods drawing, or the AI lab walkthrough? And the person replies C. And so then there's a response. Great. And this could be an automated response, right? Great, meet you there. And the student continues to engage. So a smart message is one where you're basically giving the recipient multiple choice options for their answer. So the power of smart messages, and related to that, asking direct questions when you message out, is that you see much higher reply or engagement rates. So when you're sending a message that gives people kind of an ABC type answer, they are 3 times more likely to reply than the type of message that's just, a statement. As well, when you're asking a direct question with a clear call to action, you can also see much higher engagement. The other benefit of smart messages is that when we look at our data, when institutions are sending smart messages, they're sending a much higher volume of them in sort of an automated way, typically twice the size of the number of messages they would send that were not smart. And so not only are they able to get better engagement, so the messages are more effective, they're also being more efficient in the number of communications they're able to do with the same level of effort. Right. So just talking a little further about messaging content in terms of what drives or reduces engagement. So as I mentioned, it's good to have a direct call to action, like multiple choice smart message that gets up to 3 times. Even if you just have a message with a question, you're more likely, double, as likely to get replies. However, if you put a URL into your message, you're actually reducing the chance that someone replies. 5 times lower reply rates when you're dropping a URL. Maybe this is because you're pulling people away from that conversation instead of trying to engage them in it. And then finally, if you include an image in your message, you're actually decreasing your reply rate. So messages without images have a 1.5 times higher reply rate than messages with images. And I think that's almost counter to what our human intuition might be on this, might be that, hey, if I include an image, it's going to get people more engaged. But actually, the data shows that it reduces responses. All right, so I'll hand back to Dave for this poll.
Thanks, Josie. So what topics is your institution talking about with students via text? And select all that apply. Give it another 5 seconds or so. And let's take a look. Scholarships and financial aid, excellent. Campus visits, excellent. Admissions processes and applications. Withdrawals and deferrals, which we'll talk more about that one in a few minutes. Student life. Tech support and account access. Yeah, we'll talk more about that one too. And then other. Thanks, everyone. So when I brought up the ability to know what are the topics that students are talking about, and those topics are unique based on the type of team. So there's different topics in an enrollment team than a student success team compared to a fundraising team. Go to the next one, please. And so we are still in admissions here. When we analyzed the topics, about 14% were about scholarships and financial aid, 15% are about campus visits, applications, all things applications. Is it in? What else do I need? And then a pretty sizable portion was others. So we might try to get more granular in that area in the future. So I also mentioned that we're able to know if a conversation is resolved, and this is AI determining that. So it's not like the staff member clicks a box and says, yes, this is resolved. It's we ask the model, look at this whole conversation, and if it's resolved, then the student's need was met, and there's no further action that you need. Another status would be responded. So this means that the student had some need, and a staff member replied and never heard back. So and then unresolved, very clearly, this is an open item that the student had this need. And it has not been resolved yet. And I would like to say, just on behalf of all of our clients out there, we didn't have this resolution status data until recently. So our clients for years have been having the conversations without that kind of the insight there. And it's so easy to think about your email. Like, did you get back to everyone that ever sent you an email, and what's in the CRM? So it's a really powerful type of insight. So topics with the highest resolution rate tend to be rather specific and easy to understand. So campus visits, those conversations were getting resolved at a 91%. In admissions here, conversations about scholarships and aid were being resolved at a high rate, and withdrawal of an application was being resolved at a very high rate too. Topics with the lowest resolution rates tend to be a little more squishy. So conversations about student life, all of the intricacies around applications, and tech support and account access was the lowest resolution rate. And I remember when we were looking at the data, that also had the lowest sentiment score. So that students that were communicating around tech support and account access in admissions were feeling the emotions of one was anger, but the other one was fear, and fear had a 2-to-1 relationship over anger. So, and we suppose that this is a very stressful time for students, and if they can't get into the systems and upload their transcripts or do the things that they might need to be able to do it, it puts their college path at risk. So that's why we see that fear there. And when we look at the higher the resolution rate, so the higher that the conversations are being resolved, the more positive the sentiment is. So you're having good productive conversations. They're being resolved at a higher rate. Everyone's happy. And complex admissions processes, like I said, around scholarships and financial aid and applications and tech support, had the lower sentiment, and the withdrawal deferred admissions topic didn't have all that bad of a sentiment. I mean, people were just kind of pragmatic about it. So one interesting thing we found with the data, that if the first conversation between a staff member and a student went well, it was positive, they are much more likely to have more conversations, which makes sense. We've seen our clients tell us that a student, if they have a positive conversation, they're going to save that phone number in their phone and reach back out when they need more help. And conversely, if it was a negative first conversation, that tends to be the last. So from when we look at when a student opts out, so they can do this by typing stop or quit, and these opt-out percents are not like based on the percent of messages. This is based on the conversation. So a conversation might have 10 back and forths or 20. And the opt-outs are very clearly high. And it probably makes a lot of sense that if they're going to go to some other school or they're not going to go to your school, they tend to opt out just to make sure that the communication then stops. We've seen opt-outs be higher when there's a frustration-driven conversation, and then lower as we get to more general things and campus visits, and only 1% that if the sentiment of appreciation was being seen had a very, very low opt-out rate. So distinction here, a text conversation, what that is a series of text messages exchanged between a recipient and a sender within a specific inbox. That's our And inbox might be managed by one person. That's like Dave's inbox, or it could be on behalf of a whole team, say the housing team, say. And so one conversation is it back and forth between that inbox, that phone number, really, and a student. And then if 3 days would pass when there's no back and forth, we would then say that conversation's over and they could start a new one if there's more activity. Conversely, notifications and reminders are typically one-way triggered messages to nudge a student to take a certain action. These are often pre-set up in the CRMs, say, so that when they get to this status, and we want to remind all the students of this entry term with this application type to get to do this thing. They're helpful too, but they're not the same thing as a conversation. Okay. So,
Okay.
oh, this is for you. Okay.
But you keep going. So we thought it would be fun to see what you think the impact of conversations is. So how much higher do you think application completion is for students that engage in those kind of back and forth conversations via text versus the sort of one-way text notification or no communication? So just select your option here. We'll give it a moment to everyone to process. Okay. So 2 times, 8 times, 15 times, 21, 34 times. All right. Let's see the results. All right. So most people are about 50% think it's 8 times higher. So, if students engage in a two-way conversation via text, they're 8 times more likely to complete their application. 15% think it, or 25% think it's 15 times. And then a very small 5% think it's 34 times, and similar 10% think it's only 2 times higher or greater. So let's see, what is it actually, Dave?
Right.
It is actually 34 times.
It was actually 34. So there definitely is a helpful use case for notifications and reminders. Just doing that alone has shown to correlate. So I'm using the word correlate because it's correlation, it's causation, it's a little of both there. So app completion, when you have a conversation with a student, is 34 times higher. Enrollment yield. So enrollment yield is all of your accepted students and what portion of accepted students would convert to enrolled students, right? Which is a very key metric that institutions optimize for. And then the last two is, did they do the thing? Did they visit campus? Did they submit their FAFSA? And also a rather 45 times more likely to visit campus and 13 times more likely to submit their FAFSA. Okay, so I just spoke about enrollment yield. This research was done by watching 300,000 plus students and how they progressed through the enrollment funnel. This is from public and private school. These are for four-year publics and four-year privates. And when we look at the accepted students that didn't receive any text, they converted to an enrolled student at just 3%. But you can see the more conversations that a student is wanting to have and being willing to have, the much higher percent of them are going to yield, or the much higher percent of them are going to do the thing that you want them to do, which is visit campus or submit your FAFSA. So back to the causation correlation here. If they're willing to have a bunch more conversations, they're more interested, but they had a lot more conversations so that they will be less confused. They'll feel more welcomed, all of those kind of things too. So the key is to make it really efficient for your students and your staff to be able to have these conversations.
Right. All right. So this is a bit of a summary of best practices for admissions teams. I'm not going to go through all of it because I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, but you can also find all of these best practices in the reports that we shared and we'll share again at the end. There was also a question in the chat that I'm just going to quickly answer for those of you that arrived a little bit late. So the data that we're talking about here is from about 80 million text conversations that happened during the 23 to 24 academic year at about 600 different institutions that are using Mongoose as their conversation intelligence platform for all their text messaging and so on. So it's based on that data, anonymized and aggregate in our analysis of it. Excuse me. All right, so let's move into student success. I know we had a good number of student success teams on the call here today. So starting off with best times to engage when students reply most, I touched on this briefly earlier, but really you're looking at that kind of 7 a.m., 2 p.m., 6 p.m. as your times where you're going to see the most replies coming in from students. Similarly, the fastest replies. So if you want to send a message that's most likely to get a quick reply, you want to do it between 2 to 4 p.m. or midday, maybe when people are having their lunch break. The worst time of days in terms of replies is right at 11 a.m., at 5 p.m., and also in the evening. So these are the ones least likely, or when people are least likely to engage with the messages that you're sending. And then days of the week does matter. So this is where if you're messaging students on Sundays and Wednesdays, you're going to see the highest engagement. Mondays and Saturdays, you're going to have the lowest response rates. Just like with admissions, short messages perform better in this case, 2 times higher reply rates if your message is in that 100 to 150 character range. And you really want to avoid those super long 300 plus length messages. I talked about smart messages earlier. Here we see even better performance of smart messages. Under enrollment admissions, it was 3 times higher reply rates when you're doing kind of a multiple choice type question. Here in student success, we're seeing 4.5 times higher reply rates. Of course, you're also able to send those out in a much higher volume if you're using a sort of an automated solution like Mongoose. Just in general, it's better to send a message without an image in it if you want to increase those reply rates. So 2 times higher reply for that. 3 times higher reply when you put a question in versus just a statement. And then, leave out those URLs unless your intent is actually to send them to a page, and that's fine. You don't need the response. Leave out the URLs because you'll see 6 times higher reply rates. Okay.
So what were the topics that were coming up for student success? Student support services, academics, and a lot of things around appointments, getting them scheduled, getting them rescheduled. There's a lot of back and forth. I can't imagine if how well that would have gone if they didn't have that medium to coordinate that. So we talked about resolution rates, and the highest resolution rates, this is for current students, okay, was around student life, which was also where we were seeing the most joy, the emotion of joy, which is really great. And then, things that are more tactical around graduation and career support and appointments are pretty high resolution rates. And then the lower the rates, financial aid was one of the higher rates in admissions, and it's one of the lower rates here. I think maybe institutions, not intentionally, but it may look more straightforward to prospective students. And then when they're there, it gets a little more hairy. Technical issues and support had low rates, and mental health support. So this isn't like a counseling office that's going to use it. That's like, well, we opened up a case and it wasn't resolved. This just happened to come up in conversations with more functional teams like student success or advising. So when we look at the resolution rate versus the sentiment, we are seeing the same things here. The higher the resolution rate, more positive the sentiment is. And you could be in those two, the two highest areas are student life and graduation and career support. And the more complex the topics, around the lower the resolution rate and the lower the sentiment. So that's around financial aid and tech support and mental health. And the even when there's a withdrawal or deferred admissions, it was still relatively positive. And it is also relatively positive as students were looking for help to navigate their coursework.
Great, thanks. And so this is a summary of our best practices for student success teams. Again, it's available in the report, so I won't spend much time here, just to keep us some of those best practices in mind in terms of thinking about the time of day and the day on which you're sending the messages if you're looking for replies, keeping it concise, leveraging smart messages, asking questions, and so on. And then really, if you're able to get insights into the sentiment of your messages, that will give you areas, or the sentiment of your conversations, I should say, that will give you an idea of where to focus your efforts in terms of optimizing the outreach that you're doing. All right, so we'll spend a couple of minutes here now on chat. So I mentioned that we looked at about 133,000 chat conversations to understand what's working, what's not. So, I think many of you are experiencing chat can be a really high impact channel. So here the engagement rate is, a visitor hits the web page, chat pops up and offers to help. 83% of those visitors are actually engaging with chat. And so, that's a really good indication that it's having a meaningful impact. And 82% of the people engaging with chat are able to serve themselves. They're not asking for an escalation or indicating that their question wasn't being answered. Chat is also a really great way to help people outside of office hours. So, you might already have teams that are working evening hours and so on, but the reality is a lot of people are coming onto your website at midnight or at, when they first wake up in the morning. You might not be around. So you can see that close to 50% of chat conversations are actually happening outside of the normal workday. And almost 100% of visitors are interacting with the AI, like the automated AI chatbots during off hours. And when they need a follow up, about 30% of all the follow up requests that are happening through chat are happening in those off hours conversations. And then, being able to be actioned by team members when they start their workday. All right, so we've come to the end of the presentation section here. Again, please scan these codes to get your own copies of the reports. We're happy to also answer any questions. I'm just going to look I know we answered a few as we went. I'm just going to look in the Q&A here. That was answered. So does anyone have any new questions to ask? Otherwise, what we could do is there were some that we answered via chat that we could answer here for everyone to hear. So earlier, someone asked a question about using Mongoose to give students feedback on missed questions in class, saying that this would be very helpful. Dave, do you want to answer that question live now?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a really interesting idea. We are exploring ways to better integrate with the LMS and um, having ways, we're considering even ways that a student could text into something that knows the syllabus and knows the due dates and knows the content that could help them even when it's not live during class. So very much appreciate that.
Hey, thanks. There's another question, which I think is maybe to do with our chat bot, or just chat in general, which is um, how many students and teachers are receiving tutorials on how to prompt a chat bot, because this can reduce hallucinations, and make information more concise and accurate. Do you have thoughts on that, Dave? I mean, it sounds like it would be good overall for anyone using any kind of
We just
AI.
had we just had AI prompt training here at Mongoose for our staff. That's not a service that we provide to our institutions. However, I could see that being helpful if we want to add that ability to prompt or to check within our product, so that they could find out, how are students feeling and what should I do about it, and those kind of things. But the short answer is no. That is not a best practice tutorial that we offer.
Okay, thanks, Dave. All right, I'm just double checking that we didn't miss anything in the chat. I think there's been a number of comments in the chat, which I think are really completely right, which is that when you're using a platform to message or engage with students, you really want to be thinking about the intent, what your intent is. So are you trying to get a response? Is an interaction and engagement what you're looking for here, or is it just a notification and sending that message? So I think always having that idea of intention behind it is really important. Okay, we have one more question that just popped in. Do you think undergraduate degree students and graduate degree students respond differently to communication? Any ideas on how to engage undergraduate seeking students? And I think that's a great question. And one thing I can mention, I'm going to get Dave to answer, but one thing I'll just mention briefly is that we see all sorts of teams using Mongoose. So our most successful institutions and partners are those that are using Mongoose like campus wide. So for all different types of areas and departments within the institution, as well as for undergrad versus grad. So when you start to get that campus wide picture, you can start to compare the results that you're seeing and what works best for one group versus another. Dave, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I think not a big surprise, but often undergraduate students are going to they're going to care how fast it takes to get back to them and how empathetic you are. And they're going to want to know that it feels right and they're going to be supported and they belong there. And graduate and adult ed tends to be more tactical. Can I fit this into my schedule? How many credits is this? And how do I do this? And where do I go? But those are not mutually exclusive either. So the key that we tell our clients is just really try to understand, what the student wants and how you can help them.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we might have reached the end of our questions. Thank you all for attending and for engaging with us and with each other in the chat. We really appreciate your time and your interest in this. And please download your copies of the report and feel free to share it around with as many of your colleagues as you like. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.